How's it going, guys? It's Mr. Lone Wolf, and today I'm going to go and do the gameplay and review on this new truck, the Derry Special 15C-177. Another one with a code name. I've just been calling it the Derry 15C, or the Derry Special. Yeah, it took me a little while to get this footage, but we'll get stuck into it, see how it goes through. Engine-wise, that is the original top engine, but then you can unlock one that takes it from A on the power to S on the power. It's better, but it still feels a little bit weak in situations. Gearbox, I've gone for the Advanced Special. I tried all of them out, and I just found that they're all pretty similar, to be honest. But the Advanced Special's pretty normal. The suspension, by the way, there is active suspension. The tyres, you've got like a custom set that's got their own kind of alloys and all the rest of it. In the end, I went for the chained because I went and tested them out anyway, and I've done a lot of the other reviews with the chained version of the muds, and I seem to get along pretty well with them, so I kept that on. Diff locks, it's got those on. Spare wheel I always put on because it's got its nice own little place to stash it. It doesn't really get in the way of anything else. Snorkels, I go for like the smallest one, but they're both on the roof, so they seem pretty similar. And then as for add-ons, you've kind of got like crane, sideboard, saddle high. You haven't got a saddle low. You can have like a custom fire engine setup going on that can carry 2,200 litres of water. Rooftop wise, I've got the fog lights. You can get like a cage around it and a roof rack. I do put them on a little bit later here and there, but I just keep it pretty kind of bare bones at the start. As for the front bumper, strictly speaking, it's like without one it sort of doesn't stick out as much. But to be honest, I kind of like both of them. One looks a bit like a Hannibal Lecter mask. It kind of shields the headlights as well. One of them's got more of a skid plate that kind of goes further under the truck, but if you leave them off like that, you got pretty high nose clearance as far as that goes. And then yeah, the other add-ons are just like horns on the roof and stuff. I don't really bother with them too much. As for the colours, you've got like a custom one that's makes you like a fire engine basically, and then you got these ones. One look like an 80s shell suit. And then all these colours, which to be fair are quite nice. The green one's got quite a nice version of green. That orange and sort of navy blue one looks pretty cool. Yeah, I'm going to go with a custom paint job since it's like a unique one for it. And then yeah, having a look at it, I mean looks wise the truck looks really cool, I think. And you've got raisable suspension. It's active suspension, so you've got to like obviously go into the menu and activate it. Turning, they've seemed to have fixed the whole issue where once you like feed steering back in, it seems to like do a little turn the opposite direction. They seem to have fixed all that, so it's just more normal now. Looking around the cab, looks oldish. I can actually look out the back and see the garage doors and my own tyres, so that's about as much as I could ask for. There is no window behind like the when you turn your head round sort of, so yeah, you got to poke your head out the windows to see what's going on behind you if you're in first person view. And then revs wise, when you actually sit here in neutral and rev it up, it revs up to, I think it's around 2,900. It's hard to tell because the steering wheel kind of sits perfectly where you'd like to see really. The horn, it's not terrible. It's not amazing, but it's not that bad. It'll do. Yeah, so like I say, I leave it sort of bare bones for the most part, so I've not got the roof rack or anything on at the minute. Setting off, it's a little bit smoky, but you don't really notice after a while. I think all the smoke sort of dies down after a little bit. Handbrake takes a little while to kick in. I've noticed it rolls on quite long after you put the handbrake on. And yeah, for trailers, like I say, you've not got a saddle low, so I can have the saddle high stuff and I can have all the stuff that tows behind me. But yeah, because there is no saddle low, you can't have like that new water semi-tanker thing, whatever it's called. And obviously like the step deck and all the normal trailers, you can't have those either. And then when setting off driving along, one of the big issues with this truck is it just feels too slow. Like even when you wind up into 5th gear out of 5 in the advanced special gearbox, if you're going along like at the yard on a flat tarmac road or something, you get like a certain amount of speed, but then when you start hitting the muddy bits, even though it stays in 5th gear, it just goes a lot slower than like it should really. I think in fact yeah, like it's doing right now, and like this is still 5th gear, it should sort of be pulling better through the mud I think. And then in high gear, to be fair, in high gear it's pretty difficult for it to kick you out of high gear. but it is quite slow in high gear, so that's probably part of the reason why. You can kind of see even going up this next hill as I turn here. Is it not? I don't know if it's jumped into 5th now, but yeah, you can just see how slow it's crawling up this hill. It's probably one of the slower trucks we've had in the entire game. I find like the Tatran, for example, the TUZ 420 Tatran, I find that really slow, and that's a solid vehicle. It's just gets a bit too boring for me. I made the little dog appear there, by the way. That, yeah, I don't know, when you do the camera on certain angles, you get a little dog that appears. I found him, he's still there. For killing trees, I actually tried this the other day and came down here and I smashed all 3 trees. This time, the second tree in particular looked like it took a fat hit out of like my pace, and yeah, I wasn't able to knock all of them over. Again, that's the thing, because it's not going that fast to begin with, it's building up less momentum. And through there, that's one of the places it not only did alright, but I kind of figured it probably would. Quite a lot of trucks that go faster when you go through there in high gear, they just start to wheel spin and churn the mud up. But as this thing was fairly slow in the first place, even in high gear it just kind of slowly chugged its way through there. And yeah, I mean, I didn't leave most of it in the end with like looking at the revs, but they're a little bit like, I don't know, they sort of, yeah, they limit it here, there and everywhere. I'll get back to that in a minute. Driving along here, testing out the suspension, one of the main things I've noticed is there's not really much suspension travel at all. You see when I smash into these rocks, the front axle in particular barely ever moves at all. And I think like when you're driving along off-road stuff, the whole truck feels really rigid, like it's, yeah, the suspension isn't soaking up the bumps and sort of adjusting the tyres to fill the gaps and keep clawing away. It's just like a very solid chassis really, that's not got a lot of flex going on. So when you're bumping over rocks like this, you don't really get any suspension travel, and then because of that, it doesn't take much for it to just bounce your truck kind of up off the ground, where it lifts a lot of the weight off all the other wheels. And I think that's part of why it bleeds quite a lot of speed when you're driving along. You just, quite often you see 1 or 2 of the wheels are spinning quicker than the others. And yeah, it could certainly benefit if it had diffs permanently on, even when you're in auto and that would be nice. Smash that anti-terrorist barricade out of the way. It seems pretty good as far as hitting things front on, because the engine sits quite far back and this thing's got a big old snout on it. Yeah, you don't really take that much damage from, like, engine-wise anyway, from crashing. You can take awkward hits on your suspension that suddenly delete like a fat part of it. Now, to be fair, crossing over this Black River crossing, it's actually doing pretty well. It seems definitely more designed for going across this sort of stuff. Like, it wasn't rapid over there, but it's yeah, it was decent. And like I say, the chain mud version things, the tyres, I thought actually suits it pretty nicely. So even going across this field, it's in the farmer's field on Black River. Going across there, quite a lot of vehicles get stuck bouncing across those bumps and they sort of get knocked out of high gear and all that. This thing was ticking along quite nicely. For killing these trees, it was close. It's almost bleeds enough speed to stop, but I was like, see there for example, it was pretty close, but just about able to knock them all over in one go. In auto as well, because I think in high gear it's just about slow enough there where it will bounce you back off eventually and you'll lose too much speed. Yeah, on to, what's this, Northport? Jumping in here, I mean again, like, off-road wise, going in what's normally super snow and super mud and all that, seems pretty decent for the most part. The vehicle sits tall enough so it can climb those barriers pretty nicely. Even this one as well, scuffed it a little bit and seemed to catch on like a slight invisible hitbox, sort of around where that winch cable is. But it got there in the end. Had to go into low range with the diffs on for this, and probably do a little bit of a steering angle, but it, yeah, got it up there in the end. That's what she said, of course. And again, this is like another super snow section, which there's certainly vehicles that go slower than this. I mean, overall, to be fair, snow's one of the things this truck kind of behaves pretty well on. And then climbing up this rock here as well. And it's little things like this where I think the chain helped, because I bumped over to the left a bit there, Most other tyres would just wheel spin and shift you over to the left at that point, but I think the chain got just enough bite on like bare rocks like that it managed to keep itself straight and sort of bite its way up there. And yeah, jumped off that side, it kind of smacked its chin on the floor, but it kept driving. There's a rock there that I kind of land on each time I jump off that. And yeah, that didn't really slow it down. When I came to jump the wall, sadly, I did loads of attempts at this, and it's getting the footage for this. I started pretty bloody early last night as well, and I ran out of time yesterday, and then even today I've been going for quite a while, and yeah, this has probably took like 2 solid nights of getting the footage and all the rest of it, just because in general the truck's quite slow, so to get to each place and so on. As you can see, there's jumping over the wall. I ended up doing a winch from the rear of the truck to one of those trees to kind of help pull it over, because I never managed to get over the wall just on its own like free power. If you go a bit too quick, it smashes its suspension to pieces on those pipes, but you can see here, I mean, I'm going a couple of miles an hour, it's already blown a tyre, now it's completely annihilated the suspension and the fuel tank, and the tyre's gone bang. Yeah, using a winch again to kind of crawl over there. I went back to the garage at some point and put a roof rack on, just so when I got to this side of the wall I could fix it all up a bit, which I could do most things, but I think there was still a tyre blown by the end of it, which I wasn't too happy about. But by now, that was about my 8th attempt going back. I'd probably been there about half an hour just to get that one little bit. So again, this thing was burning through the hours. And going through the trees, considering it's a pretty sizable truck, it did alright going that way. I just didn't steer in time really there. That was probably just being a bit rusty on my part. Eventually, when I found the gap in the trees, I obviously got caught on some kind of branch, and it does sit fairly tall, the vehicle, and these branches can be a bit trollish. It might have caught maybe where the spare tyre is, or kind of on the roof rack, but just kept sort of letting off the throttle, flooring it again, and eventually wiggled our way through there. But you can see now's another good example where the suspension's just so solid that once you tip a little bit, it doesn't absorb it or anything, and you're like a solid plank, and now your wheels aren't really touching the ground properly. Just kept it pinned though, and eventually clawed my way out of there. And as far as climbing, like, as long as you've sat fairly evenly, it climbs alright. Got to the top here, it's obviously heavier at the front half of the vehicle, because say when I got to the top there, the nose end just swung straight to go down this side of the mountain. It didn't like pivot on the top or anything. And then yeah, cargo test. Like I said, there's no saddle load trailers, so I had to bring a whatever this trailer. I always forget the name of this trailer. Turning circle wise, pretty terrible in the scheme of things. It's not the end of the world. It is a pretty big truck, but yeah, that's definitely a 3-pointer. That's no way it's going to make that turn in one go. So you're probably talking more like the twin steer kind of turning circle. I think AGL's done a version of this, which again I've had a little go with, but because I keep getting blue screened, I've not had much of a go. But he's put rear steer on it as well, and yeah, overall it's just a much nicer truck to drive. And then now, I mean, this is absolute flat out as fast as it's going to go, and it doesn't look too bad at the minute with like the road conditions and all the rest of it. But yeah, as soon as you go on to anything but road, even though you're still in top gear, it'll go to probably almost like half the speed of that, and then it really does feel too slow. But it wins back some points in situations like this. This can be, in my gameplay and review videos, kind of a notoriously difficult bit to crawl through. And this thing did it. I just left it in high gear. Yeah, I apologise, there's a tiny little glitch there. But it actually drove through there pretty much without issue, which, considering it's got like the bigger trailer on and all the rest of it as well, the truck sits high enough that the legs of that trailer don't catch in the ground too much. And yeah, grip-wise and that, it pulled through there pretty nicely. So it took the turn a bit wide, almost hit that trailer on the right-hand side, which again is like another good gauge for how sharp the turning is. So now I've got to go and find somewhere to park this trailer. I'm definitely running out of spots. Although credit to the game, these trailers have been here a good old while now. And I'm not sure how many trailers there is. There's got to be, I don't know, 60 or 70 I would have thought. So cargo wise there's got to be, well, it's definitely in the hundreds. And yeah, as of yet, touch wood, the game hasn't really glitched yet. I did notice a glitch which I'll show you in a minute. At this point I'd parked the trailer in reverse and you can't actually see anything on my truck, but when I get to there was a wheelie bin that was stuck under my chassis that then, I don't know, when you get a certain distance away from where a random piece of scenery spawns, it just locks in place on the map, so that kind of smashed my back end up. And then I've noticed now, look, when I go onto the menu, it doesn't list my truck on the menu, but this is, I believe, only in Northport or, you know, say Alaska. I switched to a vehicle and then went to switch back to it. It's nowhere in the list of vehicles. It just doesn't appear. So basically I had to drive an ANK over here just so I could kind of change vehicle when I'm right next to it. And again, look, the top of the list is a Cat 745C, which I'm not in. I'm in the Derry. It just doesn't appear on the list. So just bear that in mind, that if you're on Alaska, once you switch vehicle, you can't just switch back to this when it's on the other side of the map. You actually have to, like I say, go and drive up next to it and change vehicle kind of the old-fashioned way. Yeah, cutting through this water, I mean, it's because it's a little bit on the slow side, you didn't even really notice when it hit that deeper section. And then now it's back in the shallower section and it's sort of going the speed it's going, really. I mean, overall, pretty simple and easy through there. Take that turn nice and early, squeezing through this gap in the rocks. Considering the size of the truck, actually did alright. Ends up leaning a little bit. You see there, like, it took a hit of damage. Like I say, it's one of them where once you pick up damage in this thing, it tends to take pretty monstrous hits, and I think because there's such little give in the suspension, that kind of doesn't help, because once it does register damage, it's like, yeah, there's no give in the suspension to soak it up a little bit. That tree in like the bottom left of the windscreen is kind of what I use to measure. It's not too bad on like when you're in the cab. It's not the best, and that A pillar thing like at the side kind of gets in the way a little bit, even though it's sort of split into like a little mini window as well. For the most part it does get in the way a little bit. But yeah, clearance over what would be the bonnet, although there's not really much of one going on this. It's not too bad. I'd say 6 or 7 out of 10. Slightly above average, but yeah, certainly not amongst the best vehicles in the game. But overall, to be fair, in the cab first person view, it's not too bad. You can see what you're doing. I didn't crash anywhere down here or clip anything. And going down here, it seemed fine, like as far as bumping. It's got quite a nice shaped nose to sort of bounce just up the other side, but then there, yeah, just caught my rear suspension on that rock, and that completely deleted that. So thankfully I had the roof rack on me, so I just fixed myself up quickly. And see, through this muddy section, this slows quite a few trucks down. This thing barely even know. Typical. Apologies, I got another little tiny glitch there. The amount of footage, I think that's why I've been getting some glitches, because the amount of footage I had to save to get this gameplay and review video was crazy. I even tonight had to clip like the first 40 clips and then render the video to turn it from like 40 clips into one clip, because I can only have a maximum of 50 clips. But there was that much editing to be done between all the different little bits, whereas some videos I can kind of just let it play between the sections because it's only a matter of seconds, whereas this thing, yeah, soon adds up into minutes. It's a little bit sketchy going along this, I don't know, Rockbridge or whatever. It's just, again, because there's such little play in the suspension, once you bounce on something it tends to like jiggle the whole truck left or right, or it'll scoot your back end round. But for the most part, I mean, it got over there just fine. The truck possibly could even just drive over that water section, even if I fell off the rocks. It could probably carry on going anyway. And as well, going through this bit, I mean, this is like usually super snow. And yeah, in auto it's staying in 5th gear. Like I say, snow was probably one of the sections where it was like, felt pretty decent, felt like it wasn't really driving me too mad or anything. It still sits low enough to get under that oil pipe, But I cross here, and obviously I've done just about every vehicle in the gameplay and reviews. The thing started to tip over, and I've got quite a few good examples coming up. Like, weight-wise, there's definitely, I think, one, not quite enough weight in the actual chassis, like level with the wheels. But there's also sort of what I think is like a slab of weight, say just under the roof rack, like on the actual roof of the vehicle. That's, yeah, just heavy weight, so once you start tipping over, it doesn't fight against it at all. If anything, it wants to tip over, and it kind of wants to land on its roof. It's sort of a little bit, Bruce was similar to that. He's got like a slab of weight in his roof, but he sits so low and wide that it's pretty difficult to tip over in the first place, whereas this vehicle, I don't, like, it's one of them. It almost, at some points, the chassis of it reminds me a little bit like the P12, where it's actually quite a long, narrow chassis. And going through this muddy section, it was doing alright for most of it, but once I went into the really deep, like, death mud crazy section, devil's mud section, it was just stuffing its nose in the ground, and at that point, and sort of when you look at the front axles, it's like a bit of a wall that it's got to push through the mud. Yeah, but it near as made no difference, got stuck, so I put a winch out just to pull me over to the left-hand side a bit, where it's slightly shallower mud again. Still pretty deep, though, in the scheme of things. And then it got out of there, so yeah, not terrible in mud, but once you reach that limit where you're starting to hit like the actual cab, it stops at that point really. And you can see now is just another good example. You can just tell from the weight mechanics, like when it rolled back to its wheels, once it's got enough momentum to get back to its wheels, it's also got enough momentum to then carry on and go back over to its roof. So at this point, unfortunately, I had a goddamn horse of a vehicle chilling around in the mountains somewhere, so I had to send him in. He's like a graceful little mountain goat. Look at him go. And I think at this point, actually, this might have been the first time I'd attempted to flip this thing. So I found a little snowbank to dig into, dug his little loaf hole. But you can see though, it's not easy, because it's like the vehicle doesn't want to return to its wheels. It's pretty happy sat on its side like this, a bit too much to be honest. And I don't really like vehicles that are like that when it comes to tipping anyway. I just sort of write them off as, it's like the Bandit is another one as an example, that loves to sit on its side to the point where sometimes I don't even bother with a loaf rescue, but it's not because the loaf can't rescue it, it's just I don't want to sit there for half an hour dragging the thing around on its side until I get lucky and catch a little bloody molehill or something. See there, like, gets back to its wheels now, it should easily just sit, but because there's weight in the roof, it just wants to carry it over. And I think at some point I even recovered to the garage just to take the roof rack off to see if that'd make any difference. I didn't really think it would, but just for the sakes of testing it out and all the rest of it, I did. So I managed to climb up to here. It was close to tipping. I think at this point I've also lowered the suspension, even though I've got active suspension, so I can turn it back on afterwards. But yeah, just to overall try and make the truck sit as low as possible. As far as this nose test, I mean, the vehicle has got a bit of yeah, a big old snout on it, so it's going to catch a lot of stuff. At least it's shaped like the right angle, sort of like the Tatran, for example, that sort of thing. But again, it's just it's got a big overhang on it, and I could kind of see that coming. I was on a bit of an awkward angle, but I knew it was going to tip at some point. And I ended up editing the footage out just because, again, this video was like long enough without. But I drove the Zix up from, it was just down the road really, just to kind of have a feel of what the Zix is like climbing up these hills. And yeah, considering they're a roughly similar vehicle, this is definitely longer, but the Zix, you know, they're 8-wheeled, all the rest of it, like big cab at the front, and the Zix is definitely more planted than this is. And even now, it's still struggling just to get its nose past. It's one of them really, where under the nose there is like a bit of a hitbox that catches on the stuff, so it's, even though it's shaped, say, roughly like the front of the TUZ Tatran, the Tatran doesn't have anything on the front plate that catches. It's just really smooth and it slides off everything. This feels like it does dig in a little bit here and there. And you can see again, because the chassis is like really rigid and all the rest of it, when you're trying to sort of find your way over lots of bumps and awkward sections, it doesn't want to mould to the shape of the terrain you're on and kind of wind its way around it. Yeah, it's just like a big solid plank that then when you reverse you bump into another section and it kind of swings your back end round, and it's sort of, yeah, it's more difficult to find like the places where your wheels are actually planted on the ground and you can apply steering and all the rest of it. To be fair, that was like another little sort of nose test section, I suppose. It got through that bit alright. As long as it's not too tall, like the section that you've got to scuff your way through. The front bumper will just kind of like rub against it, but yeah, whatever, there is some little hitbox thing going on underneath there. So next up was like the roll-in test, which even though at this point I've been rolling in the mountains for like the last hour, got it to tip. It actually went again for that twice, but you can see the weight carries it over again. I got a bit lucky now that it sort of landed on a bit of an angle, so it landed quite confidently on its tyres and didn't really try and carry it further over. I was looking around at this point like, well, do I go and do another test? But I mean, that said it pretty well. It rolls, and it's not the biggest fan of landing back on its wheels unless you get a little bit lucky with it. And even now, look, that's because the diffs aren't on, just in auto, it's losing enough power just for that second axles in that little dip, so I had to go low range diffs on, which again this year, I don't know if they will or not. They have done it once or twice in the past, like the Tatra Force was a bit of a terrible vehicle when we first got it, and they did overhaul that pretty quickly. Personally, I think at the very least they need to put diffs always on this. But yeah, I just think it's with the engine power, like when I wind up to, in auto, or in neutral, sorry, I got up to 2,900 RPM. When you're in high gear, it'll sit at about 2,000, but if you're just travelling along the road, it'll drop to about 1,500. When you're in the low range of the diffs on, it sort of depends, but you're probably talking between 1,500 to 2,000. And in 5th gear, I think it was around 1,800, 2,000, so it's basically taking away like the top third of your engine power wise and all the rest of it, as just the way that they seem to have rev caps and that on it. And yeah, I just think it's a bad way to do it, because then like this is supposed to be the new most powerful engine in the whole game, and the truck doesn't feel ridiculously heavy. There's definitely some weight to it, but it doesn't feel like it's the most heavy vehicle we've ever had or anything, yet the amount of engine power is not really there. But like I say, because they're blocking at least a third of like the top end of the revs on the engine, I think that makes a big difference. Thankfully again I had a goddamn horse, because as I was turning into that quarry section I hit a bump and rolled. It's the old loaf had to save the day. I think that's why you always get yourself a loaf, take one with you, because if not at that point I would have had to disconnect the trailer, recover to Zimdegorst, which then I'd have to go through that loading screen, and then drive back to the gateway, and then go through that loading screen. So even that, a little bit like that alone, just saved me probably 5-10 minutes of faffing around. And I mean, going through that muddy section I just did back there, places like that, this feels pretty decent. Like, it doesn't really get slowed down much compared to what it's already doing in the first place. It's just a shame that what it's doing in the first place is a little bit on the slow side to begin with. But yeah, I think now I've still got a loaf turn behind me, and like, you don't even notice the difference really. And yeah, in this case I went for the ramped flatbed. I could have brought like another saddle high trailer, but I was curious to see, because sometimes the ramped flatbed kind of gets beached on the sort of tip of the first Quarry Hill that I go up, so it's quite a good example. I went for quite a steep drop there, and again the front bumper, it kind of lines up with the front wheels diagonally, so in that situation it yeah, sort of scuffed its way along and got around that pretty nicely. Got the concrete slabs, and again no real change to the speed. It's power wise, I'm in high gear, it didn't even really moan about that or anything. just put a loaf there as a little lifeline. And I turn here, and I could already tell it was doing it. I was worried, like, it was close to where it could tip at this point. Obviously, the front wheels are just scuffing along. It's not fully turning, so I ended up going a little bit wider on this section than I was hoping for. Hence the a little bit of reversing going on. But now you can start to see limits to, well, there was like the lack of diffs. I had to go low range diffs on. But you can hear the revs, you get some, but now it's kind of run out of juice. And that's where I didn't look in this specific instance, but I'll be willing to bet if I went and looked at the rev counter, it wouldn't be anywhere near 2,900 RPM. And yeah, that's not amazing when a truck's already fighting just to get its own back end over that first Quarry Hill kind of ledge. And now's where it basically, it's the ramped flatbed, like between the front and rear axles, it's beached on that ledge. But this thing's struggling to fight it. I was messing around here for a lot longer than is in the video, but again I had to be quite severe with the bits I'm chopping out of it. So we had a goddamn horse in front of us. Winch to him and kind of keeping it pinned. I did at one point disconnect the trailer, tried winching it over the hill and then reconnected, but then when I let the handbrake off I rolled back enough to where it pretty much ended up in the original place, so hence why I edited a lot of that out. And now it's sort of getting stuck there, so I fired a winch out to the telegraph pole. Thankfully it was just enough to reach. There, look, it was, I mean, that was close to tipping, and quite a few vehicles are when I turn around on that angle, because the trailer's kind of wanting to tip a bit as well. But yeah, I fired a winch out, because at this point I really didn't want the whole truck to tip, and me have to go and sort of untip it, then go around and get the footage again. The trailer kind of got stuck on the corner of those rocks, so I had to do a winch from the trailer to the telegraph pole so I could hoist it up there. See, it's just moments like that where you start to, like, oh, it's not too far away from where it does want to go. Climbing up here, I was in high gear at this point, but I kind of knew about now it won't take long before it says, I mean, to be fair, it didn't actually come up say stalling then, and it is pretty lenient as far as like stalling in the high gear goes, but I knew it was not going to be long, so low range diffs on. Because it's quite a solid chassis again though, not much play in the suspension, it's sort of struggling to find, you've kind of got to place the vehicle where all the wheels are already touching the ground. It's not going to adjust its suspension to kind of find that. Now, I didn't actually put this one up there, there's a loaf from last time and just already chilling up there in his loaf hole, so stuck a winch on him, but like I said, I hadn't placed it properly, so it was probably on a bit of a awkward angle. Got me this high though, and then I think I was able to do the handbrake. Didn't roll too far back, or it was starting to, but got a winch to that tree. That's enough. The loaf did his job. But yeah, this thing definitely wouldn't have got up there on its own. Whereas by comparison, I think Bruce, as an example, absolutely motored his way up there. And then because the steering angle's really wide as well, there's no way I was making this turn. And I was fighting it for a while, but I was kind of just keeping it floored, steering left and right, and eventually kind of found a bit of grip. Wasn't happy about it though. And go for a run down here. I think, yeah, I did it in the high gear, but I could just tell, like, bloody hell, that feels slow, so I think I stuck it back in auto. which still feels reasonably slow, but it's better than high gear. Swerve at the last minute because I've got a loaf and a Land Rover there. Bounce down there alright, but you can see it's throwing the trailer around that much that it did kick the cargo off at that point. Which partly, this trailer has a similar problem I suppose, where there's little to no suspension travel on that either. So between the pair of them they were kind of bouncing down there. I purposely did that to tip it, because most of the time at this point I send in a loaf. First thing I needed to do was get the trailer straightened up. Look at him go. Then it did take a lot of faffing around. I tried to pull him up the hill at first, and I got it rotated most of the way, but again it doesn't want to tip back to its wheels, so I started dragging it basically up the hill on its roof, which I didn't want to do. So then I went back round here behind the trailers. Goddamn professional. So now I'm on Lake Cove. I was going to head over to the icy lakes. I mean, smashing through this wall of stuff, you can see it was running a little bit low on power there. It looks like I've got a fence post stuck in the front of my truck. That will become apparent as to why that's an issue in a second. Yeah, threw me around. It smacked that P512 PF pretty hard as well, because it didn't even flinch. That out, like, immediately tipped. So yeah, some kind of glitch going on, I think, with the fence post getting stuck in me. We got out there eventually. It's definitely a heavy enough vehicle that it punches through the ice. Like, I don't think you're ever going to make it across the ice without that happening. But it's fairly decent for climbing its way out there. Sometimes I got stuck, sometimes I didn't. Like, with this active suspension on and the tyres are fairly big, and because of the way it's like nose is shaped and all the rest of it, it's possible to get out of there. You can see from the amount of blue ice chunks, the ice at the minute was feeling pretty sort of solid. It felt like it used to, and then for a while they sort of seems like they changed it to where it was more like a slush puppy, where you never really got like solid chunks of ice. Well, you did, but they didn't really act like it as much, whereas now they feel like they're pretty solid chunks of ice again. But as usual, there's a goddamn horse chilling somewhere on the map, so I sent him in and he saved me bacon. Jumped it into the water. I mean, it definitely doesn't float, this one. That's probably well, yeah, it's a good thing overall. Crossing this river on flooded foothills. Again, plenty of weight, so it's touching the actual riverbed. Climbs over there, it's a little bit bouncing over the rocks because of the lack of suspension, but made it through there pretty convincingly. Even this side as well, this mud can be super mud at least, I would say. It slows down quite a lot of vehicles, and this thing's, I mean, it's not going to set any lap records, but it's pretty comfortable at climbing through this sort of mud. And this is just a little bit further on. I don't always include this footage, but as I carried on driving with it, it's just what the log station was behind me in flooded foothills, so I was crossing this bit of the river. Same thing really, kind of pretty confidently crossed it, but you can see it sort of bouncing around on the rocks. But it made it. And then this is like going basically up the waterfall on flooded foothills. And to be fair, it kind of did better than I thought, because going up here, as you can see happening right now, you do bounce over a lot of rocks. I don't know, it looks like I got a little bit lucky. Probably just most of the rocks went sort of under my chassis. That was a little glitch there going on, I didn't edit that. But yeah, for the most part it was climbing up. I left some of this thing, because I'm sure at one point, I'm in high gear, it stalled, but then it unstalled, and I was just flooring it the whole time. But it's kind of a good example of how lenient it is in high. Whatever decided to make it stall, it was probably around now, I think. I mean, I was near enough stopped dead, so yeah, there, but it blipped into it and blipped straight back out of it before I even had time to react. So at that point I just kept it pinned in high, and it actually never needed me to change out of it. So yeah, that's one nice thing about it, that it is pretty lenient. This was just a little bit further down the trail. I normally peel off to the left, So you just get a little bump. It starts to carry you over though, that's the thing, because the weight's high up, it really doesn't fight against it. Once it gets a hint that it's tipping, it's a bit too happy to just carry on with it and yeah, roll. On, what's it called, White Valley now, yeah, I mean I cut most of it out going down the runway because it is pretty slow. Could barely even manage a jump off here really, just sort of dribbles off. And then landed, and yeah, once it lands like that, the weight is more than happy to sit upside down instead of trying to roll over. So I came back, brought a goddamn horse of me, you can see, yoinks on the cable. Gives it a little tap on the back end so it didn't flip. Gets out the loaf. He knows what he's doing. Yeah, going for the drowning test. The snorkel, it's on the roof, set sort of nearish to the back of the roof, so it's probably about best case scenario, all things considered. It's a fairly tall vehicle. It's not the tallest, it's like the cab and everything of it's quite squashed and low really, but yeah, it goes pretty deep. That's what she said, of course. And yeah, it was about that deep before it started to, like, just on the limit of where the snorkel is, so I thought I'll reverse it back out and then floor it back in and just go as far as I can until it stalls. So it's about now when it starts taking damage. Got fairly far, further than a fair amount of trucks. Yeah, send in the loaf, drag it back out there. Took a bit of dragging out, I'll be honest, I edited some of that out again. I mean, got it done, but yeah, it was a little bit of kind of slackening the winch and then flooring it against it. Loaf again, headbutts it, freezes in midair, just doing a quick T-Rex check. Once he's realised it lands back on its wheels, Loaf unfreezes himself and he's ready to go. And then I fixed it up and then I brought the Loaf back with more supplies. Does a nice little roll. You see now you think, ah, Loaf's stuck on his roof, but he finds a way, just wiggles his way back to his wheels. He knows what he's doing. He's been Loaf trained for a reason. Someone's at escape. Yeah, pack the Loaf on top, which he fits, which is nice. You're able to actually, yeah, do the packing animation. So crossing this, I already knew that this truck would, it wouldn't cross as in like it's not tall enough to do that. And then some of this footage I got tonight, some I got yesterday, and when I got to around this point, I went to save the footage and I couldn't because I'd run out of memory. So then I had to go through all my stuff and start deleting some videos. Yeah, then I came back and what else? It did something else, so I had to go and do it again. I can't remember, I might have missed the footage or lost the footage or something. Yeah, it's taking damage. Once it gets up to 80 damage on the engine is where it then goes from damaging it to just flat out stalling it. So unpack the Loaf. I did fix the engine on the Derry just for as and when I get it restarted. Do a zombie winch though from the winch. I'm in the Loaf now, so winch from the front of the Loaf to the front of the Derry. Hold the winch button down, but leave the handbrake on the Loaf so he doesn't move on the roof. And yeah, zombie winching out of there. And just a Loaf taking his Derry for a walk in the sea. Pretty normal. Then now I could kind of tell like the roof's out of the water now, so the Derry would start again. Just got to make sure. See all my floating trailers and stuff in the background. What was that in the sky at the top? Was that a Hummer maybe that had been flying around? You do get a few of them flying around on here. Yeah, so I got the Loaf light packed and I'm in the Derry, fired the engine up. Low range diffs on, seeing if it could climb this hill. Which to be fair, it can. There's another Hummer stuck in the rocks behind me. That one is in there good, whole front of the truck's wedged in there. I went to ram that tree over. It is a killable tree, I must have just been like a few mile an hour off enough speed, so the tree did a good bit of flexing then, didn't Didn't die though. Might have to be one of the boys now. So this was driving up the mountain, and at this point, no roof rack on, but I've got the suspension raised, like the active suspension. Hit there, and you can see it just started to tip. So I came back again and lowered the suspension this time. See if that helped. Which was probably a little bit more paying attention to the fact that I could roll there. You can see though, it definitely wasn't far off. I even let off the throttle there. Maybe if I just kept it pinned it could have gone. But we just about made it through. See, like there, it's not too far off wanting to tip. Only takes like one awkward rock or bump at this point and it could go. But we're getting there. Low range of diffs on at the minute, so at least then it doesn't try to limit the amount of power you got or anything, even though it sort of limited it in the first place, but I mean it's not going to try and change gear when I start rolling back down the hill. And again, one of the reasons I like the change is this piece of rock I'm driving on now. If you come up here in muds or anything, you normally wheel spin on that section. You have to follow like the snowy bit up to the left of me, but when you got the chain on, it actually does grip enough onto just like bare rock that you can actually just carry on driving up this mountain. Made it to the top again. Handbrake's a little bit on the slow side, and the front half of the truck's a bit heavier, so it didn't quite balance perfectly up there. And then yeah, started flying down here because there's a tree down here that I normally ram, and most vehicles can't break this tree. I did do a little edit here because I actually hit the tree and then reversed up. I hit the tree the first time in high gear, so I went for it again in auto, and yeah, it was close, but it did break the tree. It's one of the few vehicles that is able to, which doesn't really necessarily mean a whole lot. It kind of means that there's enough weight in the vehicle. Probably coupled with the size of the tyres and how quick you can roll down the hill going through super snow and all the rest of it, that has enough momentum to hit that tree. Yeah, as I was reversing though, just clipped my wheels on that rock. That was enough to tip me over. And you can see, just enough to roll back to my wheels, but that also means just enough to carry on tipping. It's pretty rare that you ever get lucky and like roll back onto your wheels, and you can see now with the weight of it, it's wanting to twist round, but once it gets there, it's almost fighting itself, where now the roof's trying to bury itself deeper into the mountain, hence why it was like flicking mud up. And at this point it was just stuck like that, it wasn't rotating any further around. And yeah, that's it. Recover it back to the garage. Like I say, overall, I mean, it's got some good things about it. I mean, I like the looks of it and all the rest of it. It's decent on snow, better than I thought, and just in like super mud and that sort of stuff in general. But yeah, the big things that are wrong with it is it needs weight lower down, and they need to sort the gearing or the rev caps out, whatever it is, to just make it go a bit faster and get to where it's going a bit easier. Because it's one of them that would sort of suit, well, probably a snowy map for one, but maybe a smaller map because it's so slow, whereas these new, like Albany River in particular, is quite a big map, and this feels quite slow on it by comparison. There was a little look at its stock. Money wise, I think it's about 180 grand to buy it from the shop. I fully equipped it as much as I could, and I got it up to about 253,000 when it was fully equipped, so yeah, not cheap, but I've done the money cheap, so I've got 70 million or whatever it is these days, so yeah, I'm not too worried about that. But yeah, I mean, that's about it for today. Overall, could be better, but it's not terrible. Yeah, like I say, that's it for today though. Hope you enjoyed, I hope that helps. Thanks for watching, thanks to my Patreon members. Get yourself a loaf because he's a goddamn beast, and I'll be back soon.